Hey everyone, Tyler King here with another episode of NuReview. Today, as I have mentioned in my last video, I'm going to be going through Gary Numan's discography, reviewing each album as they were released. And since yesterday I did the review of the first album, for those of you keeping track, that means that today is the review of Replicas. Woo! I don't have an original pressing of it. Mine's one of those colored versions that was released last year when he did the multi-show, same city trilogy shows that he did. One night doing Replicas, next night doing The Pleasure Principle, third night doing Telecon. I was lucky enough I was able to go to all three of the Los Angeles shows. Phenomenal. I know that he's doing a tour in September, I believe, of England, doing shows that are going to be a combination of all three nights of songs from Replicas, The Pleasure Principle, and Telecon, as well as songs from the Tubeway Army debut, which is the last album that I did a review of. So, what do I have to say about this guy right here? Well, released in early 1979, it is kind of the album where Gary Numan really comes into his own, and I mean that in terms of not only songwriting and in terms of his voice, both in a literal sense and in a metaphorical sense, but also instrumentally. On the previous album, Tubeway Army's debut, there was some synthesizer and keyboard bits here and there, but they were really mainly just used as I don't want to say gimmicky, but they were kind of gimmicky. So on the Replicas album, he has actually written songs on the keyboard, on the piano, and they really make the album a lot better than the debut. This is going to be the first part of what he has self-described as his Machine trilogy, which is going to include the next two albums after this one, both The Pleasure Principle and Telecon. And this album, Replicas, you really do get a feeling that it is about machinery in some way. A lot of the lyrics have to do with self-described Machman. There's this really foreboding environment in the album that's called The Park. But we'll get to all that in a minute. Before I dive headfirst into this review, I want to say my sleeve is rolled up. It's not because I'm vain or I want to show off my arms. I just recently got a tattoo finished of Robert Smith from The Cure. There he is, right there. Kind of, the sun's shining off of his shiny little face right now. But I did just see The Cure 4 times last week, and if you're in an area that they haven't hit yet on their tour, but that they're scheduled to play, I very highly recommend that you go. They were 4 phenomenal shows. Anyways, back to the review of Replicas. So the album opens up again with a very strong opener, just like the debut. This one is Me I Disconnect From You. And it opens up with a synth intro, much like the debut did, but right off the bat you know that this is going to be a completely different beast from the first Tubeway Army record. The production is a lot more polished. Each instrument kind of exists in its own space. It doesn't have that rough around the edges feeling that a lot of songs on the debut had. Another similarity that it has with Listen to the Sirens from the first album is the opening line, which is "The alarm rang for days." So we get an alarm in this album, you get sirens in the first album. Not quite sure what that all means, but it's worth pointing out. And the lyrics on this song really do introduce this foreboding sense of urban decay that's really going to permeate the entirety of the album. On the first Tubeway Army record, that was pretty much confined to the song Joe the Waiter, but here it's given 10 songs to really manifest itself and to sink in. There's also this theme of technology, which does make sense because it is the first part of the Machine trilogy, but it's more... The lyrics do also bring up this theme of machinery working with or against humanity, which I know makes sense because it's part of the Machine trilogy. But on this album in particular, especially when compared to The Pleasure Principle and Replicas, especially compared to The Pleasure Principle or Telecon, is that the lyrics on Replicas are incredibly downer, they are incredibly nihilistic, they are incredibly just uh, depressing almost in some cases. And one of the things that really stands out on this track that is also going to stand out over the next couple of records that didn't really get too much time to shine on the Tubeway Army debut is the bass work of Paul Gardner. After this album, Jess Lydiard, the drummer, Gary Numan's uncle, is going to leave the band, but Paul Gardner stays on for the next couple of albums, and this one really is kind of the stepping stone of the bass work that he is going to lay down over the next couple of albums. And the other thing that really sets Me I Disconnect From You apart from Listen to the Sirens from the first album is that on Listen to the Sirens, you got this really throbbing, pulsy synthesizer lead in the beginning of the song that just kind of fades away into nothingness as the song goes on. But as you're listening to Me I Disconnect From You, you really realize that the keyboards are going to be the primary instrument on this album. There are some guitars for sure, but they're more playing a secondary or a rhythmic role, which is really most evident on the second song, which is Our Friends Electric. Now, Our Friends Electric was the second single released for this album. Rub my ear. Now, Our Friends Electric is the second single released from this album, the first one being Down in the Park, which we'll get to in a minute. But Our Friends Electric really is the song that launches Gary Numan's career, at least in the UK, to the point where it becomes a #1 hit. He gets on Top of the Pops performing this song, and he's really introduced to a lot of his fan base. And the really weird thing about the popularity of the song is that at its heart, lyrically, it's about robot prostitutes. And if that wasn't enough, the other really distinct thing about Gary Numan's lyrics at this time, and not just on this song, but also on every song on this album, and I even want to say every song for the next couple of albums, is that he has no choruses. No line really is going to be repeated more than a couple of times, and if it is, that's usually going to be at the end of a verse, like in a song like Engineers off of the Pleasure Principle album. And that's actually, there's a quote by Courtney Love where she says the really genius thing about Gary Numan is that he had these #1 hits in Our Friends Electric and Cars, but he had no chorus. The one thing that the song does have, though, it has these really crunchy guitars, it has this great driving bass line, it has this really solid rhythmic drumming by Jess Lydiard, and it has this really killer keyboard line that goes throughout the song. And one of the unique things about this song that Gary has talked about in interviews is that it was actually 2 separate songs. So there was one song that was the It's Cold Outside part, Paint Spinning Off of My Walls part, but then there was another song which was the So Now I'm Alone, Now I Can Think for Myself, kind of the spoken word parts towards the middle of the song. And the spoken word parts really do help to differentiate the song from other ones on the album. The third song on the album is called The Machman. Now this is going to be a song that is a little bit reminiscent of most of the material that was on the debut, in that there's not really that much keyboard on it. There is some synth part that comes up towards the chorus, but the core of the song is going to be guitar, drums, and bass. And another thing about the song is it's the first time that he uses the term machine, and also the first time that he references an environment called the park. In this song, it's just mentioned in passing, but in the song Down in the Park, he goes into great detail about what the park is. There are also some slight homoerotic lyrics in this song. This is a theme that he touched upon a little bit in the first album, and he's going to, throughout the album, drop little hints here and there, but it is nothing like the next song, which is Praying to the Aliens. Praying to the Aliens is weird in the sense that it's the only time I can think of off the top of my head where Gary Numan's lyrics aren't necessarily dealing with here on Earth, but he's actually mentioning something that is extraterrestrial in nature. There's this cool intro with this really nice bass line played by Paul Gardner with these almost kind of like shining star sound effects before the rest of the band kicks in. And there's this really cool bridge in the song with this really nice stop and start kind of rhythm that's going on with the band. But the lyrics on this song, um, they're really dealing with the sense of paranoia that is going to permeate the rest of the album. It's also dealing with kind of these figures that are monitoring people and making sure that there are only homosexuals left in the world. There's a line in particular, now only boys that love only boys. There's a bit where he's talking about this random questionnaire, and the question is, do you ever think of women? And then there's the line, they broke him down into a torn old queen. And the next song is Down in the Park, and this really is kind of the centerpiece of the album. It's this slow, eerie, ominous song. It was the first single released for the album. It didn't do that well commercially. Listening to the lyrics, it's very easy to see why. It takes all the things that we've learned so far lyrically about this environment and it puts them all inside of the park, which is this really nihilistic, almost apocalyptic setting, complete with rape machines, where the chant is death, death, death. This song in particular, although it didn't do too well commercially, it is one of his more popular songs. Both Marilyn Manson and the Foo Fighters have covered it, and Nine Inch Nails have covered it live a couple of times. And this is also a fan favorite. It's really easy to see why. Gary plays this song at almost every single show that he does. Ranking songs from this album, this is going to be one of the best songs on the album, and it really does show off Gary's trademark of his very alien-esque vocal delivery, as well as his kind of outsider looking in lyrical themes that he's going to explore almost for the entirety of his career. The next song on the album is You Are in My Vision. This one, like the Machman, is one of the more punk-sounding songs on the album. It's not the most remarkable one, but unlike a lot of the songs that were found on the second half of the first Tubeway Army record, it's not a throwaway. There's no intro, it goes straight into the full band instrumentation of guitar, bass, and drums, and lyrically, it is again a song about urban decay, going so far as to actually mention decaying bodies. And it's funny because he mentions the song on Broadway by name, and for hardcore Gary Numan fans, they're going to know that on his first full tour, On Broadway is a song that he performed on the tour. So it's a little bit of foreshadowing there, at least in terms of Gary Numan's live performances. And then the next song up is the title track, Replicas. This is a song that I actually became a fan of a cover of it before I had even heard the original. The cover in question is by a band called Dead Sea. They did it for, it was a Gary Numan compilation covers album called Random that was released sometime in the early 2000s, I want to say. So this really is one of the songs that made me a fan of Gary Numan, and it's this really slow, eerie, sinister song that's really built around these really loud, ominous keyboard leads and this really mechanical sounding, calculated drum line that's just keeping tempo and pace throughout the entire song and doesn't really deviate or break away from the pattern that's introduced within the first 4 or 8 bars of the song. Lyrically, this is going to be the most oblique song on the album. It recalls a lot of the lyricism of the first Tubeway Army record, not in terms of theme, but in terms of the style that they're written, to the point where I don't even know really what the song is about. But the atmosphere of the song, it's so ominous and it's so sinister and the playing is so good. I don't really care that I don't know what the song is about. I just don't want it to end. After the really amazing title track, we have It Must Have Been Years. This cool bass line that opens up the song. Again, this one is going to be really reminiscent of a lot of the material on the first record. In particular, musically, I do hear some parallels between this and the song Friends. The song lyrically, it seems to be about like missed opportunities, general disdain, and it all comes to a head with the molestation of the character that is singing the song. The lyrics go, the driver wants to touch me, he mentions all the old cop bullshit, I back away, and he's so strong, I just can't move, maybe I don't want to anyway. And that's really lyrically what Replicas is about. I mean, there's no real hope on the album. The song "May I Disconnect from You" is probably going to be the happiest song on the album. And then after It Must Have Been Years, we have two instrumental songs. The first one is called When the Machines Rock. It's this fun, kind of harmless synth pop tune. It's very reminiscent of something like Speed of Life or A New Career in a New Town from David Bowie's Low album. It's just not really as memorable as either one. And there's not really much going on the song besides this cool kind of bubbly, bouncy bass line and these cool synth effects. But in terms of memorability, it's probably the least memorable song on the record. And then finally there's the last song, I Nearly Married a Human. It's the second of two instrumentals on the album, and it's kind of odd because it's the longest song on the album. It opens with this hum, almost like a machine waking up, and then it goes into this really fragile synth part. For the first couple of minutes of the song, we get this really serene soundscape, and then the drums come in and we think, all right, cool, now the song's going to pick up, but the drums only last in this particular part about 20 seconds. The song is about, I want to say it's over 6 minutes long, but the drums throughout the entire song, they only get about 2.5 minutes worth of recording time in it. Gary has said that he thinks the album would be better without this song and the last one on the record, but I can understand that with When the Machines Rock, but I do really like this last song, I Nearly Married a Human. I think it's a lot more emotional than When the Machines Rock. Granted, the track lengths are incredibly different, but I like that despite that, because this is an instrumental, there's no real closure lyrically to the Replicas album. There's no kind of sense of everything coming to a head. There's no sense of closure. Everything that has happened in the album so far, we don't know if it's just doomed to repeat itself or if anything is going to change. So at the end of the day, you have this album, 10 songs, full of paranoia, full of this decaying cityscape, full of these machines that are preying on humans for the course of this record. And despite the lyrical themes of it being completely nihilistic, this is one of my favorite Gary Numan records. I know that it's one that garnered him a lot of fans, and I know that a lot of fans really hold this album true to their heart. I would give it a 9 out of 10 rating. If I was going to pick favorite songs on here, it would I mean, this is so hard to do, because every song on here is really good. Top 3 would be something like, Our Friends Electric, Down in the Park, and either Replicas or May I Disconnect from You. I mean, there's so much good music on this album. Even the songs that aren't great aren't bad. If I had to pick 3 least favorite songs from this album, it would probably be the Machman, When the Machines Rock, and You're in My Vision. So very solid 9 out of 10 album. There's no real bad song on this, and it is a very dramatic shift, both stylistically, musically, and in a production sense from the first record. And everything is pretty much going to become even better on the follow-up, The Pleasure Principle. We'll get to that one with my next video. In the meantime, what did you think? Do you love Replicas? Do you hate Replicas? Is it your favorite Gary Numan record? Is it your least favorite Gary Numan record? What's your favorite song? What's your least favorite song? Does this album remind you of a certain time in your life? Leave any comments in the comment box below, and I will have my review of The Pleasure Principle up as soon as I can. Thank you for watching NuReview.